I'm Nicole Biondi, Cape Town, South Africa, and I work for a non-profit company called Innovation Edge. The view that we took was that there are certain things, as I said, that children are always going to need, regardless of what the future might hold. So, for example, we started off speaking about the need that children have for care, responsive, loving care, whether that be from parents or caregivers or from preschool teachers, as an example. And that need is never going to change. But the trend that we looked at that could potentially affect that need is the accelerating pace of technology. And I shared two examples. So just to share one of them, there's this therapeutic robot called Paro. To describe it, it looks like a stuffed toy. It's about this size, this cute little white furry seal. And what Paro does is it uses artificial intelligence to learn how to best comfort its owner. So it's used to help care for people with dementia and children who suffer from autism. And this has already been used in 30 countries, as I said, and it's been around in the market for 10 years or more. And so we looked at things or examples like Paro, and I gave another example of a robot that's helping to care in Japan for children, and saying that these technologies exist, but we don't believe that they can ever exist in isolation of human care. So in my viewpoint, technology can always be used and should be used for our own benefits and to benefit us. It should never use us, and it can never replace us. And when I say us, I mean human beings. The intention of our talk was to ignite the imagination and to spark conversation. It wasn't to present solutions, and we did that purposefully because I don't think that there is any one solution to problems as big as the ones we were facing. So I work for an organization called Innovation Edge, and what we believe in is encouraging innovative thinking by bringing people from outside of the early child development space together with people who work in the sector to ideate or to think about and consider problems so that they can come up with innovative solutions. And one of the practical ways that we found in dealing with these massive challenges that we deal with is to do exactly that, and so to not depend on the usual suspects. So very often, and I understand why, and I'm not saying that government doesn't have a role, because they absolutely do, but very often there's an over-reliance on government support and government funding. And so what we try to encourage people to think about and to do is, who else might we approach and might we work with to solve some of these problems? So just on the topic of nutrition, often what happens, particularly in small communities, is that there's an over-reliance on having to buy food from big retailers outside of those communities because the local economy, the local growing economy, hasn't been stimulated. So one of the areas that we're looking into as Innovation Edge is how might we help grow the local growing economy? How can we support people who are producing food locally so that they can supply food to the early childhood centers in their community, because in that way there's a win-win for everybody. So children are always going to need care, responsive care. Children are always going to need good, nutritious food. They're always going to need access to health care. No matter what form that might take, they're going to need health care. And equally importantly, children are always going to be they're going to need to be safe, they're going to need to feel safe and protected from toxic levels of stress. So what I mean by that is that there are ways of protecting children from overexposure to negative stress. So for example, in South Africa, children generally from poor income areas live in very difficult circumstances. The rate of violence is incredibly high. Now we know at Innovation Edge, and for the people working in the sector, it is very difficult to make that kind of systemic change. That's definitely something that government needs to look at. But something that we can do is to help parents and caregivers understand that they have the incredible power of being able to act as buffers. So research shows that if children feel, whether or not it's the reality, if they feel loved and protected, that their bodies are able to thrive, that their bodies don't fall prey to toxic stress and this terrible hormone, the hormone of cortisol, being produced and affecting both their brain development and sort of later health outcomes. So we often try to not hide from the big realities, to surface those big realities, but to pinpoint things that people can do now, things that are within their control, whether on an individual level or on a society or sectoral level. So I'd like to share with you one example of the innovations or the investments in the Innovation Edge portfolio. And it's an investment that speaks to something that we really believe, something called shared value. And when we work with the private sector, we try and encourage them to have a view of shared value. And I'll explain in a practical way what I mean by this. So let me start by illustrating a problem. In South Africa, and I'm sure in many countries around the world, children don't have access to high quality early learning materials. So they go to daycare centers, educare centers, preschools, and very often there are materials, but they aren't necessarily the best quality. In South Africa's case, they also aren't very culturally relevant because a lot of our materials come from the US. And so, for example, there'll be weather charts that children get to engage with, and the weather chart will talk about whether it's a snowy day. We've never seen snow in South Africa, so children are like, what's going on anyway? So when considering this problem, we thought, how might the private sector be able to help us solve this? Now, there's a company called Barrows Manufacturing, and what they do is that they manufacture stands for shopping centers. So you know when you go into a store and you see toothpaste or chocolate and it's on this built-up stand, probably quite close to the till because the store wants you to buy it, right? So Barrows manufactures these stands, and how they do it is that they have these big sheets of cardboard and the cardboard gets printed on. So let's take toothpaste. So Colgate toothpaste has a stand, and so on this big piece of cardboard they'll have artwork, so the design that goes into the stand, and there'll be quite a big blank space, so just white open space. And these sheets of paper are run through this machine. 7,000 of them go through this machine in 10 minutes. And we started talking to Barrows, and we realized that that blank space could be used to print educational materials. So we connected them with different content providers, and these content providers gave them content that they then put onto those blank spaces or white spaces. So imagine it now, these 7,000 pieces of cardboard going through this machine in 10 minutes, quickly filling up. And Barrows has a distribution hub of 9 centers across our country, across South Africa. So what was happening was that these pieces of cardboard were then packed onto these trucks and got delivered to these different areas around the country, and NGOs who support educare centers could simply come and collect their portions, which were cut out of these cardboards, their educational materials. Barrows had their materials that they could send to the shopping centers, and the best part of it is that it cost Barrows absolutely nothing to produce all of these materials. Within 6 months, they'd produced 198,000 pieces of materials. It cost them nothing. But actually, the best part of the story is that Barrows got something out of it. It was essential to their staff to feel like they had meaning and purpose. We all want to feel like we have meaning and purpose in our work, right? And who goes to a manufacturing job and says, I'm making a difference in the world? Not so many people. But all of a sudden, staff go home and tell their families that I'm doing something to change children's lives. And it also helped them get new customers because their customers wanted to be associated with a company who was doing good in the world. And so that's a practical example of shared value and bringing somebody from outside of the early childhood development space into space to solve a problem for children.